The night is silent, almost oppressively so, the kind of silence that presses against the ears until every breath feels amplified, every heartbeat deafening. Then, without warning, the silence is torn apart. A scream, long and piercing, rises through the blackness, echoing across stone walls and shivering through the surrounding valley. It is a scream of such agony, such despair, that even the most skeptical listener cannot dismiss it as mere wind or wildlife. The locals know it well. They do not wait for it, and they do not welcome it. They endure it. For them the sound is a nightly occurrence, as reliable as the tolling of a church bell, only darker, heavier, dripping with a suffering that seems to have no end. At exactly midnight, without fail, the scream erupts from the castle that looms over the countryside. Travelers speak of it in hushed voices. Some call it a trick of the mind, an auditory illusion created by winds funneling through hollow stone. Others insist it is a curse, bound to the castle by a blood debt or an unspeakable betrayal. But the villagers closest to its shadow tell a different tale, that the scream is not of this world. It belongs to no living throat. It comes from a soul long dead, condemned to repeat its torment for eternity. The castle itself towers above them, a relic of another age. Its silhouette dominates the horizon like the jagged teeth of some great beast. By day it is a ruin of crumbling battlements and ivy-cloaked walls, a curiosity for historians and tourists. But by night, when the last light dies and the world is held in black suspense, it becomes something else entirely, a place where the air grows heavy, where shadows stretch too far, and where one knows instinctively that something waits behind the stones, something that does not sleep. Those who have dared to enter the castle at midnight tell stories they cannot always finish. They describe a stillness so complete it feels unnatural, as though the air itself has stopped moving. They wait. The first second of midnight passes, and then the scream begins. Some say it reverberates through the walls, vibrating in the bones like a physical force. Others claim it comes from beneath the castle, from a chamber no one has ever found. A few whisper that the scream does not sound external at all but invades the mind, tearing through the skull as though it is inside the listener rather than outside. One account, written in the 17th century by a traveling monk, describes the sound as the voice of one condemned in hell itself. Another, centuries later, by a British soldier stationed nearby, insists the cry belonged to a woman, her voice raw with terror. Yet there is no consensus, only one universal truth. It always comes at the stroke of 12, not before, not after. Always precisely, as the clock begins its mournful toll. Skeptics often laugh at the legend. They claim the villagers exaggerate, that no sound could be so consistent, so unfailing for centuries. Yet the evidence persists. Audio recordings taken by paranormal investigators capture the chilling cry, distinct and undeniable. Journalists have reported on it. Even scientists who arrived to debunk the phenomenon admitted they could not explain the consistency of its timing. The scream does not weaken with the seasons, does not falter in storms, does not disappear with age. It is eternal. But the question is not just what makes the sound, it is why. What force binds this horror to the castle's stones? What event, long buried beneath centuries of blood and stone, could echo so violently through time? Theories abound. The tortured soul of a maiden murdered within the walls, the death cry of a betrayed lord, the punishment of a family line cursed for their cruelty. Some even whisper of deals struck with darker forces, of bargains broken, of eternal payment extracted in the currency of screams. For those who live in its shadow, however, theories matter little. The scream is not folklore to them. It is a lived reality, a nightly reminder that the castle above is not empty, no matter how abandoned its halls may appear. Children are raised with strict warnings: never wander near the castle at night, never follow the sound, never answer if the scream changes to your name. For it is said that sometimes, just sometimes, the voice grows personal, calling not into the valley, but directly into the heart of one listener. And so the question we face is chillingly simple. Is the scream a haunting, the tortured voice of the dead refusing to rest? Or is it something far worse, something alive within those walls, bound not by death but by hunger, using the cry as bait for those foolish enough to investigate? Tonight we begin our descent into that question. into the stones, the shadows, and the centuries of horror tied to the castle that screams every midnight without fail, because history does not forget, and sometimes history does not forgive. It is impossible to understand the scream without first understanding the place that carries it. The castle stands as both monument and tomb, its stones older than the memory of the villages it overlooks. To the casual traveler, it is merely another relic of Europe's violent Middle Ages, a fortress constructed to keep out invaders and assert the dominance of a ruling family. But to those who know its history, the castle is far more than stone and mortar. It is a scar carved into the land itself, and like any wound it continues to bleed. The earliest records suggest the fortress was razed in the late 13th century, during a time of chaos and shifting borders. Wars were not fought by armies alone but by families desperate to hold on to their dominions. The land on which the castle was built had already seen centuries of violence, pagan sacrifices long before Christianity arrived, Viking raids along the river that snaked below, and feudal disputes that painted the soil red. It was chosen, according to legend, not for its strategic advantage but for its cursed nature. Even then, whispers claimed the ground was unholy, and that no church dared stand upon it. And so, when the noble family laid their first stone, they may have sealed their fate. The architecture tells its own story. The walls rise with unusual thickness, as though their builders feared something more than enemy catapults. The windows are narrow slits, suffocating and watchful, designed not to welcome light but to resist intrusion. Beneath the castle lie chambers dug deep into the bedrock, extending further than most strongholds of its kind. Locals believe these caverns predated the fortress itself, their origins lost in time. Rumors speak of rituals once performed there, ceremonies that called upon powers the church would not name. The family who built the castle insisted these basements were for storage, but the villagers knew better. They avoided the place long before the scream began. History paints the castle's first lord as a man both admired and feared. He was ruthless in battle, celebrated for victories, yet whispered to possess a cruelty that extended even to his kin. His marriage was not one of love but of alliance, and the union was marred by suspicion and betrayal. Chronicles hint at secret executions carried out at the fortress, prisoners lowered into pits beneath the earth never to return. These stories would later merge with folklore, transforming the lord into a figure of almost mythic wickedness. Whether he truly trafficked with the occult or simply ruled with an iron fist, no one can say, but from the very beginning, the family line was stained with rumors of blood. The castle's walls bore witness to countless sieges. Armies encircled it, starving its inhabitants until desperation set in, yet the stronghold never fell by force. It survived arrows, fire, and famine. What it could not withstand, however, was treachery from within. Several times through its long history, betrayal allowed enemies past the gates. In one infamous instance, it is said that midnight was the hour of doom, the gates opened by a servant who had been promised freedom for his family, only for that same servant to be executed once the invaders claimed victory. The cries of that betrayal, villagers' whispers, still echo in the stone. Some believe the scream that emerges each midnight may be his, the final sound of a man who damned himself and his bloodline in a single act of treason. But the castle's origins are not only written in human cruelty, they are carved into the stones themselves. Travelers often remark that the fortress seems unnaturally cold, even in the height of summer. Moisture seeps endlessly from its walls, as though the structure weeps. Moss clings where it should not, and ivy grows in twisting patterns that locals swear resemble faces. Some claim the stones bleed after heavy rain, a red trickle that runs down the ramparts and stains the soil. Scholars dismiss this as iron deposits in the rock, but the villagers do not need science to confirm what they already believe. The castle is alive in its own way, and it remembers. Legends tie its foundations to older beliefs. Before the fortress rose, the land was said to host a standing stone circle, a pagan place of ritual sacrifice. When the builders tore down the stones, they repurposed them into the new walls of their Christian castle. This, the villagers say, is the true origin of the curse. To take the stones of the dead and bind them into a fortress of power was to anger forces that would not be appeased. Even today, faint carvings can be found in the deepest halls, spirals and symbols half erased, but still visible if one knows where to look. The ruling family, of course, denied any such origins, but their silence only fed the whispers. As centuries passed, the fortress changed owners. Wars shifted, kingdoms rose and fell, and still the castle endured. Each new family that claimed it seemed to meet a similar fate, prosperity at first followed by tragedy, betrayal or sudden decline. Some rulers vanished mysteriously, others died violently, and a few left in madness, abandoning the halls altogether. None could hold the fortress for more than a few generations without their bloodline ending in ruin. It is here that the past begins to blur into something darker. For while every castle in Europe has its bloody tales, this one's tragedies all seem to culminate in the same hour, midnight. Whether it was an execution, a betrayal or a mysterious death, midnight marked the turning of fate within its walls. Records across centuries note the same eerie detail. And then, somewhere along the line, the midnight hour brought not only blood but the scream. By the time the castle stood half in ruins, its battlements broken and its noble family reduced to memory, the scream had already become its most defining feature. Tourists and historians may come for the architecture, the stories of war and politics, but the locals know the truth. The fortress was never just a castle. From the moment its first stone was laid on cursed ground, it became a vessel for something far older and far more merciless than human ambition. And though its builders may have thought themselves masters of the land, they instead constructed a prison, perhaps for their enemies, perhaps for themselves, or perhaps for something they never intended to wake. And so it stands, jagged and hollow against the sky, a monument not to triumph but to torment. Every scream that tears through its walls is not just the echo of suffering long past, but the sound of the land itself remembering what was stolen, what was desecrated, and what will never forgive. If the castle was born of cursed stone, then the family who ruled it was the blood that kept its heart beating. Their lineage is remembered less as a noble house, and more as a dynasty of shadows, defined by betrayal, obsession, and a legacy soaked in crimson. To understand the nightly scream, one must trace the veins of the family who called the fortress home, for their sins may be the very reason the walls cry out even now. The founding lord, a man of ruthless ambition, secured his power through marriage to a woman of higher blood. But their union was a cold arrangement, forged in political necessity rather than affection. Contemporary records speak of quarrels that filled the hallways, whispers of infidelity, and rumors of punishments carried out in secret chambers. His heirs were raised in a house where love was absent, and loyalty was demanded with an iron hand. Such beginnings rarely breed harmony, and the family soon fractured into feuding branches, each vying for control of the stronghold. It was during these generations that the first whispers of midnight executions appeared. Servants wrote of noblemen dragged from their chambers at the stroke of 12, accused of treachery by their own blood and beheaded in the courtyard. Their deaths were not hidden but staged, performed beneath torchlight as warnings. The screams of those victims may not have been supernatural, but they left an indelible mark on the people who heard them. Over time, the practice of midnight justice became a ritual of the family, a grim inheritance passed down cloaked in ceremony and dread. But not all their sins were public. Behind locked doors, more sinister oaths were sworn. It is said that the second lord of the line, fearing rebellion, summoned an astrologer and a priest of darker persuasions. He demanded assurance that his dynasty would rule the land forever. The priest, so the tale goes, warned that such promises required sacrifice, blood for power, loyalty for protection. What happened that night is lost to history, but when dawn broke, 2 servants had vanished, never to be seen again. In the years that followed, the family's grip on the land only tightened, as though some unseen force guarded their claim. Their cruelty bred resistance, and resistance bred betrayal. Brothers plotted against brothers, wives against husbands. One tale speaks of a young heir who fell in love with a woman far beneath his station. When their secret affair was discovered, she was said to be buried alive within the castle walls, entombed in stone so she might never tempt him or anyone else again. Some whisper that her cry was the first true midnight scream, though skeptics argue such details are more folklore than fact. Still, the idea lingers, feeding the belief that love and cruelty intertwine within the fortress's cursed stones. Generations passed, but the patterns remained. Each new lord or lady seemed marked by tragedy. One choked to death at a banquet after quarreling with his kin, though no poison was ever proven. Another drowned in the moat, though no one could explain how she fell. Children were stillborn or died before reaching adulthood, a shadow of death stalking the bloodline. The family's reputation among villagers was clear. Theirs was a cursed inheritance, not a noble one. Some pitied them, others feared them. All agreed that no good could come from their rule. What makes their legacy most chilling, however, is the timing of their deaths. Again and again, records show that fateful events fell upon midnight. The betrayal of an uncle by his nephew, executed as the clock struck 12. The mysterious fire that consumed the great hall, starting just after the midnight hour. The last banquet held in the castle before its decline, where half the guests sickened and died shortly after midnight wine was poured. Whether coincidence or design, midnight became the hour of doom for the family, as though time itself turned against them. By the 16th century, the family's power began to crumble. Wars bled their coffers dry, and their enemies grew bold. Yet even as their lands shrank and their allies abandoned them, the family clung to the castle with desperation. They claimed it was their right, their destiny, their curse. The few documents that survive from this era contain disturbing references to blood oaths sworn within the fortress walls. One such document, a fragmented diary, tells of a ritual held in the basement chambers, candles lit in spirals, blood spilled into bowls, vows spoken to keep the family united. But unity never came. Instead, the bloodline continued to devour itself. The final generations were marked by madness. One heir, known to villagers as the Laughing Lord, would wander the battlements at night, laughing and sobbing in equal measure. His reign was short, ending when he leapt from the highest tower at midnight, his scream heard across the valley. Another descendant, a woman known for her cruelty, kept prisoners chained in her halls, insisting that their suffering would keep the family strong. When she died, the servants refused to bury her in consecrated ground, claiming her body twisted and stiffened in ways unnatural. They buried her in secret. But even now, locals whisper that her spirit roams the halls, her shriek mingling with the nightly scream. In the end, the family line extinguished itself. Cousins turned on cousins, alliances shattered, and the last heirs either fled or perished. But their legacy did not vanish. The scream remained, as though the blood that had soaked the stones refused to be silenced. Some believe the family was punished for their oaths, that whatever dark power they once courted claimed their souls in payment. Others think the castle itself became the family's tomb, trapping their voices for eternity. Whatever the truth, the midnight scream endures as the echo of their sins, a nightly reminder that the line of betrayal and blood has not been forgiven. And so the family's story lives on, not in triumph but in torment. Their wealth is gone, their lands forgotten, their bloodline extinguished. Yet their presence is undeniable, carved into every stone, every shadow, every scream that tears through the night. The castle is no longer theirs to rule, but in a darker sense it always will be, for though the family is gone, their sins remain, and sins unlike men do not die. The scream may today be treated as folklore, a tourist curiosity, or the subject of paranormal investigation, but in the chronicles of the past it was recorded as fact. To dismiss it entirely would mean dismissing centuries of written testimony, notes scrawled by monks, reports filed by soldiers, journals of travelers, and confessions whispered by those who dared endure a night inside the fortress. If the family's sins gave the castle its curse, it was these chronicles that gave the scream its permanence, an echo not only in sound but in history itself. The earliest surviving mention appears in a manuscript from the late 14th century. A monk passing through the region wrote of a fortress where the midnight hour brings lamentations not of this world. He described staying in a nearby monastery and being awakened by a cry so piercing it caused several brothers to fall to their knees, believing judgment day had come. The monk dismissed it as a trick of the devil, but his account was copied and preserved, spreading whispers of the cursed fortress far beyond its valley. It is here, centuries ago, that the scream first moved from private horror to public legend. In the 15th century, as wars swept across the land, the castle became a stronghold for armies. Soldiers quartered within its walls were among the first to document the scream in detail. Reports describe hardened men, veterans of countless campaigns, reduced to trembling children when midnight struck. One soldier wrote of hearing a voice, neither man nor beast, a cry that seemed to split the heavens. Another recorded in his log that the scream came not once but 3 times that night, each more agonizing than the last, until men prayed for dawn. Officers tried to enforce discipline, insisting it was nothing more than wind or superstition, but the desertions that followed told another story. Many soldiers refused to serve within the castle's walls, claiming no war was worth the sound that haunted them at night. By the 16th century, scholars began taking interest in the phenomenon. A physician sent by a noble patron attempted to diagnose the sound as natural, perhaps caused by underground rivers or the echo of nocturnal animals. Yet even he admitted that his instruments picked up vibrations far stronger than expected, resonating through the stone itself, as though the fortress were a vast instrument being played by invisible hands. His writings survive in fragments, but one chilling line has endured: "It is not sound carried by air, but grief carried by stone." The scream's reputation only deepened as travelers began recording their experiences. Merchants, pilgrims and wandering chroniclers all left notes of the unholy cry. A Venetian trader described it as a woman's wail, stretched beyond the limits of breath, ending only in silence so heavy the night itself seemed broken. A German pilgrim, on the other hand, swore it was the roar of a beast chained beneath the castle, shaking the earth in fury. Such accounts contradict each other, yet they share 2 unshakable consistencies: the timing always at midnight, and the inability of any listener to dismiss it as mere imagination. One of the most terrifying accounts comes from the diary of a servant who lived within the castle itself during the family's decline. She wrote of being ordered to clean the great hall late at night, forbidden from leaving until her work was done. When the bells tolled midnight, the scream erupted. She described it as coming from beneath the floor, rising up through the stones themselves. Plates shattered, windows rattled, and she collapsed to her knees, certain the devil was clawing his way into the hall. Her diary ends abruptly a few entries later, and her fate is unknown. Local legend insists she was found lifeless on the castle steps, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. During the 17th century, the church attempted to intervene. Priests were dispatched to cleanse the site with holy water, to drive out whatever spirit or demon plagued the fortress. Their records describe nights of prayer interrupted by the midnight wail. One priest admitted that though he shouted scripture into the darkness, the scream only grew louder, mocking his words. Another vanished altogether, his belongings found abandoned in a chamber that smelled faintly of blood and candle wax. The church officially declared the phenomenon the work of Satan, forbidding villagers from entering the castle, yet the scream continued, undeterred by blessing or banishment. The Enlightenment brought with it a wave of skepticism, and philosophers sought rational explanations. Some proposed geological activity, others claimed the stories were exaggerated, but attempts to spend a night within the castle often ended in failure. One French writer boasted he would prove the legend false, only to flee the fortress at dawn pale and shaking, refusing to speak of what he had heard. Another skeptic brought recording equipment, primitive for its time, and attempted to capture the sound. His device broke at the stroke of midnight, its gears twisted and useless. He later wrote that the scream did not merely pass through my ears but through my soul. Modern records are no less haunting. In the 19th century, a group of British officers stationed nearby conducted a formal investigation. They stationed men at different points around the castle, determined to pinpoint the source of the sound. At midnight, each man heard the scream simultaneously, yet each swore it came from a different direction, one from the tower, one from the chapel, one from beneath the earth. Their report concluded with a simple note: no origin could be found, and the sound appears to emanate from the entire structure, as if the castle itself were crying out. By the 20th century, with technology advancing, paranormal investigators descended on the ruins with audio recorders, thermal cameras and electromagnetic sensors. The scream was captured repeatedly, its frequency consistent, its duration eerily precise. Some recordings revealed undertones, faint harmonics that resembled whispers or sobbing layered beneath the main cry. Audio engineers who analyzed the data admitted the sound did not match any natural or mechanical source they knew. One even claimed that slowing down the recording revealed what seemed to be words, though too distorted to decipher. What makes the chronicles most unsettling is not just their consistency but their sheer volume. Hundreds of accounts spanning centuries, written by monks, soldiers, peasants, scholars, tourists, priests, and scientists, all united in describing a scream no one can explain. The details may differ, the gender of the voice, the nature of the cry, but the event itself remains undeniable. At midnight, the scream always comes. This is what sets the castle apart from mere legend. Ghost stories may fade, myths may shift, but the scream has been recorded again and again across centuries, cultures, and languages. It is not a memory or a rumor. It is a phenomenon, and if the chronicles are to be believed, it is not weakening with time. On the contrary, it has grown louder. Some believe the scream is a soul forever trapped, replaying its agony each night. Others argue it is the castle itself, the stones crying out with the weight of centuries of blood. Skeptics insist it must be natural, though none have yet explained how stone can produce a voice that chills the heart. But whatever the cause, the records are clear. The scream has been with us for over 600 years and it shows no sign of ceasing. And so the question remains as pressing now as it was to the first monk who heard it in the dark of the 14th century. Who or what is crying out? And what torment is so great that it must be relived every midnight without fail? When the scream became too impossible to ignore, when its echoes no longer belonged only to frightened villagers or weary soldiers, the church stepped into the story. For centuries the church had been the arbiter of good and evil, the hammer that fell upon heresy and the shield raised against the devil. To the faithful, there could be only one explanation for the scream. It was the voice of the damned, a manifestation of hell clawing its way into the world of men. And if hell had found a foothold in the castle, it was the duty of the church to cast it out. The earliest intervention came in the late 15th century, when a local bishop ordered a procession of monks to cleanse the fortress. They arrived with crosses, relics, and holy water, chanting psalms as they marched through the gates. Their chronicles describe a chill that fell over them the moment they entered, as though the very air recoiled at their presence. For 2 nights they prayed within the great hall, and though the scream came at midnight as always, they stood their ground, reciting scripture louder with each passing second. On the 3rd night, however, their leader was found dead in his chamber, his face twisted in terror, his lips raw as though he had been screaming long after his voice gave out. The church quickly withdrew, branding the castle cursed and forbidding further entry, yet the scream continued. Generations later, the church returned. This time it was a Jesuit priest, a man known for his unshakable resolve in matters of exorcism. He believed the scream was the work of a restless spirit, trapped in purgatory, begging for release. With candles and relics, he descended into the lower chambers of the fortress, where he believed the source must dwell. Witnesses outside swore that the scream that night was louder than ever before, rising in pitch until the very stones seemed to quake. At dawn the priest emerged, pale and trembling, declaring that the soul within was beyond saving, that it was not pleading for release but reveling in its torment. His writings, preserved in fragments, contained a chilling line: "What we heard is not trapped by God's laws. It is something older, something that thrives on the cries themselves." Not all priests were so cautious. In the 17th century, as superstition ran rampant and accusations of witchcraft filled the air, another attempt was made to drive the presence from the castle. A group of priests conducted a ritual of purification, walking the halls with incense and chanting litanies. Midnight struck, and with it the scream tore through the darkness. One priest claimed to see a figure moving through the shadows, a pale form mouth wide, shrieking without sound even as the cry thundered in their ears. Terrified, they pressed forward, flinging holy water in every direction, but the figure did not vanish. Instead it grew clearer, advancing toward them until one of the priests collapsed, clawing at his ears. The others carried him out, but he never recovered his sanity, muttering for the rest of his life that the voice is not outside, it is inside. By the 18th century, the church's involvement shifted from confrontation to caution. Rather than attempt to banish the scream, priests focused on protecting the villagers who lived under its nightly shadow. Rituals of protection were performed in nearby chapels, bells were rung at midnight to ward off evil, and families were told to keep crucifixes above their doors. But even with these precautions, tales persisted of villagers who vanished after wandering too close to the fortress on a dare, or of farmers who swore the scream followed them into their dreams. To the church, the castle became an open wound, a place where God's authority seemed weaker, where the veil between this world and the next was dangerously thin. There are darker accounts too, buried in whispered histories. Some claim the church was not always united in its efforts to banish the scream. A secretive sect within the clergy is said to have believed the sound was not merely a curse but a revelation. They theorized that the scream was a voice from the other side, a gateway to understanding the mysteries of death and eternity. These men did not seek to silence the scream but to listen, to record, to decipher. Whether this sect truly existed, or whether it is only legend, no one can say. But scattered notes suggest that at least one group of monks remained within the castle for months, hearing the scream every night until not a single one returned. Their bones were later discovered in a sealed chamber, arranged in a circle as though waiting for something or worshipping it. For the villagers, the church's efforts did little to change their reality. The scream still pierced the air, unbroken by blessing or exorcism. Over time, many came to see the church's involvement not as hope, but as confirmation. If even holy men could not silence the cry, then what power on earth could? Faith was tested, fear was strengthened, and the midnight hour remained a time of dread. The church's final official attempt came in the 19th century. By then, science was beginning to rival religion in matters of the unexplained, and the church was eager to reclaim its authority. A group of priests entered the ruins armed with relics, determined to record what they heard. At midnight, the scream erupted, and for the first time it was inscribed onto wax cylinders. The priests fled soon after, shaken and pale, but the recordings survived. They were locked away in a Vatican archive, classified under unexplained phenomena. Whether they remained there still or whether they were destroyed to hide what they contained remains unknown. What the church left behind was not victory, but silence of a different kind. No priest has since returned to the fortress with the intent to cleanse it. It has been abandoned to history, folklore, and the curiosity of those who dare approach. The church no longer speaks of it, as though ignoring the scream might weaken it. But the villagers know better. They still cross themselves at midnight. They still avoid the valley once darkness falls. And they still whisper that whatever cries from the castle is stronger than prayer, older than scripture, and beyond the reach of God. History records events with ink and parchment, but folklore records them with whispers, campfire tales, and trembling voices passed from one generation to the next. If the chronicles and testimonies of priests and soldiers gave the scream its permanence, then it was folklore that gave it shape. For the villagers who lived under the castle's shadow, the scream was never a mystery to be solved. It was a truth embedded in their daily lives, explained through stories older than the castle itself. These legends are contradictory, colorful, and sometimes fantastical, but they all share one thing: an attempt to answer the question no history book could: whose voice cries out each night? One of the oldest and most enduring tales speaks of the walled maiden. She was said to be the daughter of a nobleman who ruled the fortress centuries ago, promised in marriage to a powerful ally. But the girl, still little more than a child, resisted. She had fallen in love with a young servant, and when her father discovered their secret meetings, his fury was boundless. To restore honor and prevent disgrace, he ordered her sealed alive within the walls of the castle, her body hidden forever inside the stone. According to this legend, her dying screams were so agonizing that the walls themselves absorbed them, and they now release her cry each midnight as a reminder of her suffering. Some claim that on certain nights, if one stands close enough, faint scratching can still be heard beneath the stone. A darker tale insists the scream belongs not to an innocent maiden, but to the Lord himself. Betrayed by his own kin, murdered at the stroke of midnight, his spirit is said to wander the halls still seeking vengeance. His cry, some believe, is not one of pain but of rage, a howl of eternal fury that no death can silence. Folklore describes his figure as a shadowed knight, helmet dented, armor rusted, patrolling the ramparts while his scream shatters the valley below. In this version of the tale, the scream is less a lament and more a warning, a promise that betrayal will be punished for all eternity. Still another story belongs to the soldiers who perished during one of the castle's many sieges. Trapped without food or water, dozens of men are said to have died in the dungeons, abandoned and forgotten as their captors celebrated victory above. Their collective agony, it is said, merged into one voice, a single, unified scream that still breaks forth each midnight, a chorus of the forsaken. This tale holds particular weight among villagers, who insist the sound is too layered, too deep to belong to a single person. To them it is a multitude crying out, the suffering of many condensed into one unbearable wail. There are stranger stories still, woven with threads of paganism and superstition. Some villagers claim the land itself screams. Long before the castle was raised, they say, the valley was a place of sacrifice. Druids or pagan priests slit throats upon the stones, offering lives to their gods. When the castle was built atop these sacred grounds, the blood that had soaked the soil refused to be silenced. Each midnight, the earth itself releases a scream, the voice of every sacrifice blended into one. In this version, the castle is not cursed by what happened within its walls, but by what happened beneath them, centuries before stone ever touched soil. There are also whispers of bargains with darker forces. One legend tells of a lord who sought power beyond his station. In desperation, he summoned a figure cloaked in shadow, a being who offered protection and dominance in exchange for a single vow. The lord accepted, but when his end came, the debt was collected in the most horrific way. His soul was torn from him with such violence that his final scream became eternal. That scream, villagers say, is what we hear every midnight, a reminder of what happens when mortals dare to deal with powers they cannot understand. What is fascinating about these legends is not simply their variety, but their persistence. Generations of villagers have passed these tales down, altering details with each retelling yet never dismissing the core truth. The scream is real, and it demands explanation. Parents tell their children these stories not to entertain but to warn. Never wander near the castle after sunset. Never follow the sound, no matter how curious you may be. Never answer if the scream shifts, calling out your name. For in some versions of the folklore, the scream is not content to remain within the walls. It seeks listeners. It seeks witnesses. It seeks company. Some folklorists who studied the region in the 19th century noted the uncanny consistency of these warnings. Whether the scream belonged to a maiden, a lord, soldiers, or even the land itself, the message was always the same: do not engage. To listen too closely, to draw too near, was to risk being pulled into the curse. There are tales of wanderers who claim to hear their names woven into the scream, soft at first then unmistakable, a voice that seemed to come from inside their skull rather than from the valley. Those who heard it were said to wither within weeks, either succumbing to illness, madness, or sudden disappearance. Folklore also shapes how the villagers interpret the sound itself. On some nights, they say, the scream is a woman's voice, piercing, grief-stricken, impossible to endure without tears. On others, it is a man's howl, guttural and furious, shaking the very bones. And then there are the rare occasions when the scream does not sound human at all, but bestial, a distorted roar that seems to come from everywhere at once. These variations only deepen the mystery, making the scream a shifting presence, never quite the same, but always unrelenting. Over time, these stories became part of the valley's identity. The scream was not simply a haunting but a heritage, a daily ritual that shaped life itself. Midnight was avoided at all costs. Weddings and festivals ended before the hour struck. Farmers timed their work to be indoors well before dark, and travelers passing through were warned, cover your ears if you must, but do not ignore the scream. It is real, and it will find you. The legends may differ, but together they create a tapestry of dread, a folklore that refuses to let the castle's history fade. Unlike the sterile records of scholars or the cold reports of soldiers, these stories breathe life into the mystery. They remind us that while history seeks to explain, folklore seeks to feel, and what the villagers have always felt across centuries is terror. In the end, whether the scream belongs to a maiden sealed in stone, a betrayed lord, a host of starving soldiers, or the land itself, the effect is the same. Each story adds another layer to the legend, another reason for the midnight cry to endure. The scream has become not just a sound but a mirror, reflecting the fears, guilt and imagination of every generation that has lived in its shadow. And perhaps that is the greatest truth of all, that the scream survives because we need it to, because humanity cannot resist the allure of a voice crying out from the darkness, demanding to be heard. It is one thing to speak of history, of old chronicles and fading manuscripts. It is another entirely to listen to those who stood beneath the castle walls and heard the scream with their own ears. The eyewitness accounts are perhaps the most unsettling part of this legend, because they strip away the distance of centuries and place us directly in the moment, the clock striking 12, the silence before the cry, and then the sound itself, unmistakable, unbearable, unforgettable. Travelers passing through the region in the 16th and 17th centuries often included notes in their diaries about the dreaded cry. Some dismissed it in advance as superstition, writing confidently that they intended to prove the villagers foolish. Yet nearly all of them changed their tune after a single night. A merchant from Florence described the sound as a woman's wail, high and piercing, so filled with sorrow that it drained the courage from my soul. He admitted that he wept without knowing why, tears streaming as though the scream had reached inside him and broken something loose. Another traveler, a German knight, wrote that the cry was not sorrowful at all but violent, a roar of rage that seemed to call for blood. He swore that his horse bolted in terror, nearly killing him as it fled. In the centuries that followed, the testimonies only grew stranger. Some insisted the voice was clearly female, others male, others inhuman, but all agreed on the precision, never late, never early, exactly at midnight, as though an invisible hand struck some unholy bell and unleashed the cry. In some cases, people claimed the scream lasted only a few seconds, in others it stretched on for a full minute, wavering as though the lungs of some unseen being were emptying into the night. A French soldier stationed nearby described it as so loud that the valley itself quaked, as though God had split the sky. Among the most chilling accounts are those of skeptics who dared to enter the castle itself. One 18th century historian wrote that he wished to prove the stories false, so he locked himself in the great hall before midnight, notebook in hand. What he recorded is fragmentary, the ink smeared and shaken, but the last entry is legible. The scream is not around me, it is within me. It claws the inside of my skull. It will never stop. His notebook was found on the hall's floor. He was discovered outside the castle gates the next morning, incoherent, whispering the same line again and again. It will never stop. He died days later, struck by seizures no physician could explain. Then there are the accounts of villagers, humble ordinary people who lived their entire lives beneath the castle's shadow. One woman, interviewed in the early 20th century, spoke of how the scream would rattle the shutters of her cottage each night. She had grown so accustomed to it that she stopped noticing, until one night she claimed the cry called her name, not in a shout, not in a roar, but in a whisper buried within the scream. Her name stretched and distorted. She fell ill soon after and died within weeks, leaving her neighbors convinced that the scream had claimed her. Eyewitnesses in the modern era have their own chilling testimonies. Paranormal investigators who brought recording equipment often describe not only capturing the sound but feeling its physical presence. Some claim their bodies vibrated with the frequency, their bones aching as though the scream passed through flesh and into marrow. Others describe hallucinations, flashes of figures in the dark, glimpses of pale faces watching from broken windows. A few investigators have left behind audio tapes where, beneath the wail, faint voices can be heard. One recording captures what sounds unmistakably like laughter, low mocking hidden within the cry. There are also reports of animals reacting violently. Dogs refuse to go near the valley at night, howling and whining when the hour approaches. Horses bolt, cattle break fences, birds scatter from the trees moments before the cry. Some locals swear that on nights when the scream is especially loud, no owl calls, no wolf howls, no living thing dares to make a sound until the wail has ended. The entire valley falls silent, as if the natural world itself acknowledges something it cannot fight. A particularly disturbing testimony comes from the 1960s, when a group of university students camped outside the ruins as part of a dare. They drank, laughed and mocked the villagers' warnings, certain that nothing would happen. At midnight, the scream erupted. Witnesses from the village below said it was louder than usual, shaking windows miles away. The next morning, 3 of the students were found unconscious, their faces pale as chalk, their ears bleeding. When they awoke, they refused to speak of what they had heard, withdrawing from school shortly after. One of them later committed suicide, leaving behind only a single note: "The voice does not stop when you leave. It follows." And yet, despite all this terror, people continue to be drawn to the castle, compelled by a mix of skepticism and morbid curiosity. Modern tourists describe standing in groups, phones raised, waiting for the stroke of midnight. Some laugh nervously, others whisper prayers. And when the scream comes, the reactions are always the same: silence, shock, tears, fear. Many leave immediately, unable to endure another moment. A few insist they heard something no recording device captured: a whisper, a call, a plea aimed directly at them. The accounts, taken together, reveal something deeply unsettling. The scream does not present itself the same way to everyone. For some it is grief, for others rage, for a few it is intimate, personal, invasive. It shapes itself to the listener, as if aware of who hears it. This adaptability, if true, makes it more than a phenomenon. It makes it an entity, something that listens, something that reacts, something that chooses how to reveal itself. What binds all these testimonies, however, is their certainty. No one who has heard the scream walks away doubting it. Skeptics may arrive mocking, but they leave shaken. Believers may come seeking validation, and they leave with more than they bargained for. Across centuries, across cultures, across languages, the reports are unified. There is a scream, it comes at midnight, and once you hear it you will never forget it. And perhaps that is the cruelest part of this legend. It does not merely exist in the castle, it exists in memory. Every eyewitness becomes a carrier of the scream, spreading it, repeating it, ensuring it survives. The scream is not only heard at midnight, it is retold at dawn, etched into stories, into fears, into the very identity of those who witness it. To hear the scream is to become part of its story, another link in a chain that has never broken. Even now, testimonies continue to surface. New voices, new recordings, new tears shed under the moonlight. The scream endures, just as it always has. Perhaps it is eternal. Perhaps it will outlive us all. For in the words of one weary investigator, written after a sleepless night beneath the castle walls, "We came to listen for the scream. What we did not expect was that the scream listened back." For centuries, the scream belonged to the realm of fear and faith, a matter for priests, villagers, and storytellers. But as the world entered an age of science, curiosity demanded new answers. If the cry truly existed, and countless accounts insisted it did, then there must be a rational explanation: wind, water, stone, or trickery. Something that could be measured, studied, and filed away. Yet when science confronted the castle, it found itself trapped in the same labyrinth of dread as those who came before. The scream did not vanish beneath microscopes and meters. It resisted explanation, mocking logic as much as it mocked prayer. The most common theory, and perhaps the most dismissive, is that the scream is nothing more than wind. Castles, after all, are riddled with narrow corridors, broken windows, and hollow chambers. When air rushes through them, it can create eerie moans, shrieks, even voices. Engineers pointed to the valley itself, a natural funnel that might amplify gusts at certain hours. Could midnight simply be the time when air shifts and collides with stone, producing a cry mistaken for something supernatural? On paper, the theory seems plausible, but the villagers knew better. The scream does not waver with weather. It comes in storms and still nights alike. in heat and in frost, always the same, always precise. Wind is unpredictable, chaotic. The scream is not. Another explanation focused on geology. The land beneath the castle is riddled with caverns and underground rivers. Could shifting stone, collapsing chambers, or echoing water produce the sound? Geologists who studied the area admitted that seismic activity sometimes generates noises, deep rumblings mistaken for groans or wails. But here too the evidence falters. Seismic events are irregular. The scream is punctual. Every midnight. Every night. For centuries. No fault line or underground current could mimic that precision. Then came the psychologists, armed not with instruments but with theories of the mind. They argued that the scream is not real at all, but a case of mass hysteria. Villagers expected to hear it. So they did. Fear spread like contagion, infecting each generation, until the phenomenon became self-fulfilling. Skeptics who entered the castle, they suggested, were primed by stories to hear something even in silence. To them the scream was not a sound but an idea. Yet this explanation crumbles when confronted with hard evidence. Recordings exist, captured by machines that knew nothing of folklore. Scientists themselves admitted hearing the cry with their own ears, though they arrived convinced it was false. Hysteria cannot etch itself onto magnetic tape. In the 20th century, advances in audio technology gave researchers new tools. Teams placed microphones inside and outside the castle, some concealed within its walls, others positioned far into the valley. At midnight, the scream erupted, captured with clarity. The waveforms baffled analysts. The sound had the frequency range of a human voice, yet extended beyond it, dipping into registers too low and too high for natural throats. It carried harmonic layers, overtones that hinted at multiple sources, as though several voices were crying at once. Even stranger, the sound seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere, recorded simultaneously in all locations with the same intensity. No single source could be identified. The castle itself appeared to scream. One particularly unsettling experiment involved playing the recordings back at reduced speed. What was revealed chilled the researchers beneath the main cry. Almost imperceptible were fragments of sound resembling words. Not coherent sentences, but syllables, whispers, sobs, human enough to unsettle, unclear enough to haunt. Some listeners swore they heard pleas for help, others thought they heard laughter. The debate continues, but the implications are terrifying. If words are hidden within the scream, then perhaps it is not a sound at all but a communication, one we cannot yet understand. Physicists proposed stranger theories still. Some speculated about resonance, the idea that the castle's architecture, its stone composition, and the geography of the valley combined to create a natural amplifier. Perhaps midnight marked the hour when conditions aligned perfectly, releasing stored vibrations in one catastrophic burst. But resonance should fade, vibrations should weaken, and yet the scream has endured for centuries, unbroken, undiminished. Instead of fading, some claim it has grown louder, as though feeding on attention, thriving on fear. Parapsychologists offered another angle. They suggested the scream might be a form of stone tape phenomenon, a residual haunting imprinted into the very fabric of the castle. According to this theory, intense emotions, murder, betrayal, terror, can leave behind energy that replays itself like a recording. Each midnight, the stones release their memory, forcing the agony of the past to repeat again and again. This explanation fits with the countless tragedies recorded at midnight in the castle's history. Yet even this raises questions. Why only one scream? Why so precise? And why has it never weakened with time? Residual energy is supposed to decay, not endure eternally. Then there are those who reject all natural explanations. To them the scream defies science because it is not bound by the natural world. Paranormal researchers argue that the scream is an intelligent haunting, a spirit or many, deliberately manifesting. Its punctuality is not coincidence but ritual. Midnight, the witching hour, is when the veil between worlds is thinnest. The scream, they say, is a voice pressing through that veil. If true, it would explain the adaptability noted in eyewitness accounts, the way some hear grief, others rage, others a personal whisper. The scream is not a sound. It is a presence. Skeptics scoff, but even they admit unease. For every attempt at explanation collapses under scrutiny. Wind is inconsistent. Geology is irregular. Psychology cannot explain recordings. Resonance cannot endure centuries. Stone tape should decay. None of it fits. The scream remains outside the grasp of rationality, stubborn and unbroken, and perhaps that is the most terrifying truth of all. Science thrives on answers, on patterns, on proof. Yet here is a phenomenon that refuses to yield. It has been measured, recorded, analyzed, and still it resists. The scream is precise, eternal, undeniable. And so the question arises, if science cannot explain it, then what remains? Is it proof of the supernatural, or proof of something even stranger, a force we do not yet have the tools to comprehend? The investigators leave the valley with their instruments and data, but they never leave unchanged. Many admit in private notes to nightmares that linger for weeks. Some develop ringing in their ears that never fades. A few refuse to speak of their time there at all. One researcher, interviewed years after his study, confessed, "We went to study a sound. What we found was not sound. It was grief. Pure grief. Given voice. And grief does not obey science." And so the scream survives, triumphant against both faith and reason. Neither prayers nor instruments can silence it. It remains, unyielding, as though it knows that the more we try to explain it, the deeper it burrows into our minds. Each midnight, the castle knocks both heaven and laboratory alike, proving that some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Every castle carries rooms that seem to hold secrets, chambers where the air grows colder, where the walls feel closer, where silence weighs heavier than elsewhere. But in this fortress, one room stands apart from all the rest. It is whispered of in every village tale, feared by every visitor who dares approach. They call it the blood-stained chamber. Some say it is the birthplace of the scream, the very heart of the curse. Others believe it is a prison, a mouth through which the fortress itself cries each night. Whatever the truth, the room has earned its place in the legend, and those who step inside rarely leave unchanged. The chamber lies in the eastern wing, tucked away behind a crooked hallway where light seems reluctant to linger. Unlike the grand halls and battlements, this room is modest in size, no more than a square of stone, with a single window slit overlooking the valley. Yet the air within it is thick, stale, as though it has not been touched by time. Travelers describe an immediate sense of unease upon crossing the threshold, as though invisible eyes are watching. The walls are damp, slick with centuries of condensation, and there, in the center of the floor, lies the mark that gives the chamber its name, a deep ruddy stain too dark to be mistaken for rust, too irregular to be dismissed as paint. The stain has been scrubbed countless times. Soldiers poured water across it, servants scraped at it with brushes, investigators analyzed it with chemicals, yet the mark never fades. In fact, many swear it grows darker after each midnight scream, as though freshly renewed by unseen hands. Some insist they have seen it glisten, wet and raw, moments after the cry has ended. Attempts to take samples often fail, containers crack, stains vanish, results blur. Those who do manage to keep a fragment describe it as coagulated, sticky, undeniably organic. Theories range from spilled wine to iron deposits in the stone, but to those who have touched it, there is no doubt it is blood. Legends about the chamber's origin are varied, but all share one theme: violence. Some say it was the site of countless executions, where prisoners were dragged in chains and slaughtered as the clock struck 12. Others tell of a noble woman, betrayed by her kin, murdered here in secret, her body left to rot beneath the floorboards. A darker tale insists the stain comes not from human blood at all, but from ritual. It was here, they whisper, that the ruling family carried out sacrifices, spilling blood to seal their oaths with forces not of this world. Whether truth or superstition, the stain remains, stubborn and eternal. Those who dared to spend the night in the chamber have left behind chilling accounts. One investigator in the 19th century chained himself inside, determined to witness the scream at its source. His journal, discovered years later, describes an unbearable tension in the air as midnight approached. He wrote of hearing whispers before the cry, voices too soft to decipher. Then the scream erupted, not from outside, not from the valley, but from the very walls around him. His words scrawl across the page in frantic lines. It is here. The room itself is screaming. His body was never found, only the journal lying in the chamber, stained at the edges with something dark. Another account comes from a group of soldiers who dared each other to enter during the war years. 4 men went inside. At midnight, the scream erupted, and they fled in terror. But one did not make it out. His comrades swore he was standing with them as they ran, yet when they turned back, the chamber door had slammed shut. When they broke it open at dawn, the man was gone. No trace of him remained, save for a single handprint smeared in blood upon the wall. The chamber carries other strange phenomena. Visitors speak of doors slamming without cause, of shadows moving across the walls, of sudden drops in temperature so severe that breath clouds the air even in summer. Some describe hearing sobbing in the corners, faint but unmistakable, moments before the scream begins. Others claim the room seems to breathe, the walls expanding and contracting as though alive. And there are those who refuse to speak of what they saw inside, their silence more terrifying than words. Perhaps most disturbing are the stories of those who attempted to sleep within the chamber. A handful of modern paranormal groups have tried, armed with cameras, recorders, and equipment. In nearly every case, the footage is corrupted at the moment of the scream, screens filled with static audio tapes torn into shrieks of distortion. The investigators themselves emerge shaken, some refusing to return, others claiming to suffer nightmares for months afterward. A few even insist they heard the scream continue long after they left, echoing in their homes, their dreams, their very minds. Locals avoid the chamber entirely. Guides who lead tourists through the ruins will gesture vaguely toward the east wing but rarely enter. Some claim the stain grows darker when outsiders stare at it too long, as if feeding on attention. Others warn that to step inside is to invite the scream closer, to carry it with you long after you leave. Parents frighten children with tales of the chamber. Misbehave, they say, and you will be taken there at midnight, your voice joining the eternal cry. And yet, despite the fear, the chamber exerts a morbid attraction. It is the one place where skeptics and believers alike converge, drawn by the idea of being closest to the source. If the scream has a birthplace, if it has a mouth, then surely it is here. The blood-stained chamber is the heart of the legend, the darkest artery in a fortress already soaked in death. To stand within it is to confront not only the scream but the possibility that some places remember too much, that stone can hold memory, that walls can grieve, that a room can bleed. Some researchers suggest the stain and the scream are one and the same, that the mark is a wound in the castle itself, endlessly renewed by the voice that erupts each night. If so, then the chamber is not haunted. It is alive. And if it is alive, then perhaps the scream is not a ghost at all but the breath of something still trapped within, something struggling, something refusing to die. What is certain is this: the blood-stained chamber stands as the most tangible piece of evidence in the entire legend. Where other rooms crumble with age, this one persists, unchanged, undiminished. The stain refuses to fade, the scream refuses to silence. Whether it is the grave of the maiden, the site of execution, or the altar of sacrifice, it remains the fortress's greatest secret. And as long as the midnight cry continues, the chamber will never be just a room, it will be a wound, one that refuses to heal, one that bleeds into eternity. The castle may have outlived its rulers, but its scream seems forever bound to their legacy. To understand its persistence, we must look at the last generations of the bloodline, a family once feared for its power, later pitied for its curse, and finally remembered only for its ruin. Their story is not one of triumph but of decay, a slow unraveling that seemed inevitable, as if the fortress itself demanded their destruction. By the late 17th century, the family's fortunes had begun to dwindle. Wars drained their coffers, alliances failed, and rival houses circled like vultures. Yet even as their lands shrank, they clung stubbornly to the castle, claiming it was their birthright, their destiny. To abandon it, they said, would be to abandon their very blood. But what they could not see, or would not admit, was that the castle no longer served them, it consumed them. The deaths began to follow a pattern too chilling to ignore. An heir was found hanging from the rafters of his chamber, his body discovered precisely at midnight. His sister, rumored to be tormented by visions, wandered into the valley one night and never returned, though her screams were heard at the same hour the next evening. A cousin drank himself into madness, claiming the cry called to him personally, whispering promises he could not resist. Servants who remained in their employ whispered that the family had become hollow-eyed, restless, haunted by something none dared name aloud. The villagers believed the curse of the scream was not only tied to the castle, but to the bloodline itself. Stories spread of descendants who had fled the fortress, yet still claimed to hear the cry, each midnight, no matter how far they traveled. A son who moved to another city reported waking at midnight to the echo of the scream outside his window. A daughter, married into a wealthy household miles away, insisted she could hear the voice in her dreams. Some claimed these heirs wasted away, their lives shortened by an unseen hand that reached out from the fortress. The most tragic figure of the family's decline is often called the last lord, though his true name is largely forgotten. He inherited the castle at a time when it was already half in ruins, its halls damp, its towers crumbling. He lived alone in its shadow, keeping only a handful of servants who feared him as much as they pitied him. He was said to wander the battlements at night, pacing as if searching for something in the darkness. Villagers claimed they heard his laughter echoing with the midnight scream, as though he had embraced the horror rather than resisted it. Yet his end was no less grim. One winter's night, after months of growing erratic, he vanished entirely. Some say he leapt from the tallest tower as the scream rose, his voice mingling with it in one final chorus. Others believe he was claimed by the chamber itself, swallowed into the blood-stained floor to join those who came before him. No body was ever recovered, no grave ever filled. His disappearance marked not only his death, but the death of the bloodline. There were no heirs left, no children to inherit. The family tree, once sprawling and powerful, ended in silence, save for the scream that refused to follow it to the grave. After the extinction of the bloodline, the castle passed briefly into the hands of creditors, then to the crown, and finally into neglect. Its halls grew empty, its banners faded, its stones surrendered to ivy and rain. But while the family was gone, the scream remained, echoing each midnight, as though mocking the very idea that blood alone had carried the curse. Without rulers, without heirs, the voice continued, proof that the fortress had never belonged to the living, but to the dead. Some folklorists argue that the scream itself is the bloodline's legacy, their voices merged into one eternal lament. Every betrayal, every execution, every oath sworn and broken within those walls condensed into a single cry that cannot fade. Others believe the family was punished by something older, something they awakened through their cruelty and ambition. To them, the extinction of the bloodline was not an accident, but the completion of a sentence, justice carried out not by rival lords or armies, but by the fortress itself. And yet, even with the family gone, their shadow lingers. Visitors claim to see ghostly figures wandering the battlements, their mouths open in silent screams. Some swear the cry occasionally fractures, as if more than one voice bursts forth, overlapping, arguing, pleading. These moments are said to be the echoes of the bloodline itself, still bound within the walls, still cursed to relive their torment. The last of the family may have vanished, but their presence is undeniable. They live on in the scream, in the stain on the chamber floor, in the cold draughts that whisper through broken corridors. Their wealth is dust, their lands forgotten, their names erased from history, yet their torment endures, nightly, inescapable. If immortality is what they sought, they found it, not in glory, but in agony. And so the castle stands empty, yet never silent. The bloodline may be gone, But the scream carries their memory far better than any coat of arms ever could. It is their inheritance, cursed and eternal, passed not to children or heirs but to stone and shadow. For though their bodies have rotted and their names have been forgotten, the scream will not let them die. By the 19th century, the castle's bloodline had perished, and its towers stood in ruin, but its midnight cry continued unbroken. Where nobles, priests, and soldiers once roamed, a new kind of visitor arrived. The age of superstition was giving way to the age of curiosity, and with it came a surge of occultists, spiritualists, and seekers of forbidden knowledge. For them, the scream was not a warning to stay away, it was an invitation. The fortress became less a ruin and more a stage, where rituals, seances, and investigations sought to pierce the veil between the living and the dead. The earliest of these modern intrusions came from European occult societies. Drawn by whispers of the scream, they descended on the valley carrying strange tools, candles arranged in geometric shapes, chalk circles scrawled on the stone, incantations in forgotten tongues. They believed the cry was not a curse but a message, a doorway into another realm. Some claimed it was a soul in torment, others that it was the voice of a demon trapped between worlds. Their aim was not to banish the voice, but to speak back to it. One of the most notorious attempts occurred in the 1850s, when a French medium led a séance in the blood-stained chamber. She and her followers sat in a circle, hands clasped, waiting for midnight. As the scream erupted, they reported that the floor beneath them vibrated, and the walls seemed to close in. Several participants collapsed, foaming at the mouth, while the medium herself began to shriek in perfect unison with the scream. Witnesses claimed her eyes rolled back, her voice impossibly deep, as though something else had taken hold of her. When dawn broke, she was gone. Only her chair remained, toppled on its side, with the circle of followers still unconscious around her. The local villagers, horrified, burned their belongings and sealed the chamber for months. Other occultists approached with less arrogance but equal fascination. Some attempted blood rituals, slicing their palms and pressing them to the stain on the floor, believing it might awaken or appease whatever dwelled within. A few vanished afterward, their belongings discovered days later on the valley's edge, as though abandoned in haste. Their fates remain unknown, though villagers whisper that the scream grew louder in the weeks following their disappearances, as if nourished by new souls. The rise of spiritualism in the late 19th century brought even more visitors. Mediums from England, America, and beyond sought to test their powers against the fortress's voice. Seances were conducted in its ruined halls, tables rattled, candles snuffed out, and some participants swore that ghostly figures answered their calls. One investigator described a moment when the scream fell silent mid-cry, only to resume seconds later, timed perfectly with the medium's words. He concluded that the voice was not merely residual energy, it was intelligent, it could listen, it could respond. As the 20th century arrived, the age of science clashed with the allure of the occult. Paranormal investigators armed with new devices sought to capture proof. They brought electromagnetic meters, thermographs, and early audio recorders, setting them up throughout the ruins. The scream was caught again and again, its waveforms filling reels of magnetic tape. But something strange emerged in the recordings. Beneath the main wail were undertones, whispers too faint for the human ear but clear when amplified. Some claimed to hear words in Latin, others swore they heard laughter. Audio engineers debated whether it was artifact, distortion, or something far stranger. One famous investigation in the 1960s brought a group of parapsychologists who spent 3 nights within the fortress. On the first night, they recorded the scream and noted unusually high electromagnetic spikes. On the second night, they claimed to see faint lights moving through the corridors, pale and flickering, with no natural source. On the third night, chaos erupted. At midnight, the scream filled the halls, louder than any of them had ever heard. Several members collapsed, covering their ears and convulsing. One man ran screaming into the valley and was never seen again. The survivors swore the scream had not only filled the air but had spoken directly into their minds, invading their thoughts with visions of blood and fire. Their report, later published in a fringe journal, concluded with a chilling line: "This is not a haunting, this is a feeding." Occult fascination with the castle peaked in the 1970s, when a group of self-proclaimed Satanists attempted a ritual intended to merge their souls with the voice. They believed the scream was a gateway to ultimate knowledge, a voice of the abyss itself. Villagers reported strange lights on the night of their ritual, flames rising unnaturally high, shadows dancing across the valley. When police later entered the ruins, they found symbols painted in blood, candles burned down to pools of wax, and personal belongings scattered as though abandoned mid-ritual. Of the cultists themselves, there was no trace. Their fate remains unknown. Even as the decades passed, the castle remained a magnet for seekers. Psychics, clairvoyants and ghost hunters all came, each convinced they would be the ones to unravel the mystery. Some left terrified, never speaking of what they saw. Others insisted they felt touched by something holy or profane, claiming the scream filled them with visions of past atrocities. One psychic described seeing soldiers starving in the dungeons, a maiden pounding at stone walls, and a nobleman collapsing in betrayal, all playing out like fragments of memory, all bleeding into the scream that pierced the night. And still the fascination endures. In the modern age, paranormal groups stream their investigations live, eager to prove to audiences that the scream is not myth but reality. Cameras capture faces twisting in horror as the cry erupts, microphones spike into red, and the internet watches in awe and disbelief. Yet no matter how many times the phenomenon is documented, it never diminishes. Each recording only fuels the legend, ensuring more seekers will come, more rituals will be attempted, more minds will break. What is perhaps most unsettling is the idea that these investigations may have changed the scream itself. Villagers whisper that it has grown stronger in the past 2 centuries, that it carries new tones, new layers, as though swollen by attention. They wonder if the constant probing of occultists and investigators has not weakened the voice but fed it, giving it new life, new power. If true, then every séance, every ritual, every microphone placed within its walls has not solved the mystery, but deepened it. We are not listeners to the scream, we are participants in it. And so the fortress remains what it has always been, a stage where faith, science and the occult collide, each attempting to wrest answers from a voice that refuses to yield. Some leave shaken, some vanish, some never recover. But the scream endures, mocking them all, growing louder with every attempt to capture it. Perhaps it does not want to be understood. Perhaps it only wants to be heard. The castle today stands as a ruin, but not a forgotten one. Its towers may be broken, its walls crumbling and its banners long rotted away, but its reputation has outlived every stone. What was once a fortress of blood and betrayal, then a shrine for priests and occultists, is now something else entirely, a tourist attraction. And yet, unlike the castles turned into museums or wedding venues, this one offers no fairy tale romance. Instead, it offers something darker, the promise of terror. In daylight, the fortress is deceptively ordinary. Visitors wander its cracked courtyards, run their hands along its ivy-choked walls, and peer into the hollow windows where shadows gather. Guides tell stories of noble lords and tragic maidens, pointing to the stain in the infamous chamber, repeating the legends with rehearsed flair. Some laugh nervously, others scoff, dismissing it as local superstition repackaged for tourism. Children tug at their parents' sleeves, bored until the guide lowers their voice and mentions the scream. Then, even in daylight, the atmosphere changes. Eyes dart toward the towers, conversations fall to uneasy silence. For all the jokes, everyone knows the real attraction lies not in history, but in what happens when the sun goes down. It has become a ritual of its own, tourists and thrill-seekers gathering outside the castle as midnight approaches. Some arrive with expensive equipment, thermal cameras, digital recorders, high-powered microphones. Others bring only their phones, ready to capture a viral clip. They sit on the grass, clustered in small groups, laughing to cover their unease. The villagers, who once avoided the place after dark, now watch with wary resignation. They know what is coming, and they know what the tourists do not. That curiosity has a cost. As the clock strikes 12, the crowd quiets. Jokes fade, nervous laughter dies, and all eyes fix on the fortress. The scream erupts, as it always does, and the spectacle begins. Gasps ripple through the onlookers. Some drop their phones in shock. Others break into tears without knowing why. A few turn pale, stumbling back toward their cars, unwilling to stay another second. Cameras capture the moment in grainy footage, the valley falling silent, then shattering as the cry tears through the night. Within hours, those clips flood the internet, shared across social media as proof of the paranormal. Comments fill with debates, hoax, sound design, mass hysteria. But those who stood there know the truth. The scream is real. No video can capture the weight of it, the way it seems to crawl under your skin and cling long after the echo fades. Tourism has commodified the legend. There are guided midnight tours, tickets sold to thrill seekers who want to stand beneath the walls when the cry comes. Merchandise fills the nearby village, t-shirts emblazoned with screaming faces, mugs stamped with "I survived the midnight scream." But beneath the novelty, unease lingers. Not all who come as tourists leave as such. Some collapse from panic, claiming they felt the voice inside their head. Others report nightmares for weeks afterward, waking at midnight to phantom cries no one else hears. A few vanish entirely, last seen walking toward the castle long after the tours ended. Local authorities wrestle with the paradox. On one hand, the scream has become the valley's most profitable export. Visitors arrive from across the world, filling hotels and restaurants. On the other hand, too many disappearances cannot be ignored. Too many reports of strange behavior surface afterward. Tourists muttering to themselves, sketching the stain from the chamber over and over, or insisting the scream called them by name. Police investigate, but what can they prove? The castle does not kill in ways that leave evidence. It only takes. For the villagers, the commodification feels like blasphemy. Their grandparents crossed themselves at midnight, shut their windows, and prayed for the cry to pass quickly. Now strangers cheer and clap when the scream erupts, treating it as entertainment. Some villagers warn that this new attention only feeds the voice, makes it stronger. They whisper that the scream is no longer just an echo of the past, but a living thing growing on the energy of those who come to witness it. The more cameras pointed at it, the more ears tuned to it, the more it thrives. And there are darker accounts. Tourists have reported hearing whispers before the scream begins, faint and personal. A group of young travelers claimed they heard their names woven into the cry. A woman fainted, later insisting that she felt someone breathe against her ear though no one was near. Some swear the scream follows them home, playing in their dreams, jolting them awake each night at the stroke of 12. Whether these are exaggerations or proof that the scream is spreading beyond the valley, no one can say. Even technology has not diminished its mystery. High-definition recordings capture the cry in chilling clarity, but always with strange distortions, sudden bursts of static, warped frequencies, shadows flickering across frames where no shadows should be. Analysts dismiss these as technical glitches, but those who were present insist the distortions match exactly what they felt, the moment when the world itself seemed to twist beneath the weight of the scream. The castle today is not merely a ruin. It has become a spectacle, a stage where folklore collides with modern obsession. People arrive eager to be frightened, and they always get what they came for, sometimes more. What was once a curse has become an industry, but the voice has not weakened with exploitation. If anything, it has grown louder, more insistent, more eager. It greets each new generation of listeners the same way it greeted the villagers centuries ago, with agony, with fury, with a cry that cannot be silenced. And so every midnight, tourists gather and cameras roll, the scream erupts, echoing across the valley, and the world watches in awe and disbelief. Yet beneath the spectacle, beneath the flash of phones and the thrill of fear, something darker stirs. For the scream is not a show, it is not entertainment. It is a voice from the depths of history, a wound that will not heal, a curse that refuses to die. And though visitors may laugh, may clap, may share their shaky recordings online, the scream is laughing too. It has survived centuries of priests, skeptics and scientists. Now it has an audience larger than ever before. What if that was its purpose all along? To be heard, to be remembered, to spread And if so, then perhaps the tourists are not witnesses at all. Perhaps they are participants in a ritual they cannot see, fueling a voice that grows stronger with each midnight cry. The castle that screams every midnight stands today as it has for centuries, broken, hollow, and eternal, and yet it feels alive. Its stones breathe, its chambers mourn, and its towers seem to lean closer each night as if listening to the valley it has haunted for so long. The question remains, the same one asked by priests, villagers, scholars, and skeptics across the ages: why does it scream? Whose voice shatters the silence each midnight? And what truth lies buried in the sound that refuses to fade? Theories abound, each as compelling as it is terrifying. Some cling to the idea of a trapped soul, a maiden buried alive, or a lord betrayed, crying out in torment forever. This explanation comforts those who want to believe the phenomenon is human, that it can be named, understood, and perhaps even pitied. To imagine the scream as a single voice, crying for release, makes it tragic rather than incomprehensible. But the variations in the sound, the shifting tones, the way it adapts to each listener, complicate this. If it is a soul, then it is a soul fractured, splintered, or multiplied until no humanity remains. Others embrace the notion of a collective echo. Perhaps the scream is not one voice but many, the agony of countless deaths absorbed by the castle's stone, executions, murders, betrayals, sacrifices, all blending together into one unbearable wail. The stone tape theory suggests that trauma leaves its mark, that places can replay memories like recordings. In this view, the fortress itself is a living archive, bleeding out centuries of suffering each night. Yet even this falters, for recordings should degrade, fade into silence. The scream, however, has not weakened. If anything, it has grown louder. Residual hauntings do not strengthen with time. Something else does. The rationalists cling to science, wind, geology, psychology. They point to resonance, to underground caverns, to the power of suggestion, and yet their instruments betray them. The sound defies origin, recorded simultaneously in multiple places with equal strength. Its waveforms resemble a human voice but stretch beyond human capability. Whispers hide beneath its main cry, too deliberate to be accident. Science can measure it, but cannot explain it. Each attempt at rationality ends with the same confession, muttered reluctantly by those who came to debunk it: the scream is real, and it does not fit. The occultists go further still. To them the scream is no echo, no mere haunting. It is a ritual. Midnight, the witching hour when the veil is thinnest. A voice pierces that veil, not by accident but by design. Some believe the scream is a doorway, an invocation repeated endlessly. Others claim it is a lure, bait cast into the darkness to draw listeners closer. They point to those who vanish, those who collapse, those who insist the voice follows them home. If the scream is intelligent, if it listens as well as speaks, then perhaps it has been feeding on attention all along. Each villager who trembled, each priest who prayed, each investigator who recorded, all of them participants, all of them fuel. And then there is the darkest theory of all, that the scream is not an echo of the past, not a spirit, not even a haunting. It is something else entirely, something alive. A parasite bound to stone, a predator cloaked in sound. It feeds on fear, on memory, on the energy of those who dare to hear it. The scream is not the symptom of the curse, it is the curse itself. A living entity disguised as a voice, one that has endured because it knows endurance is its weapon. It cannot be destroyed by fire, or sword, or prayer, because it is not bound to flesh. It is bound to the hour, to the silence before midnight, to the need for witness. Without listeners perhaps it would fade, but listeners have never failed. They come willingly, century after century, ensuring its survival. The villagers know this better than anyone. Their warnings are not superstition but survival. Do not follow the sound, do not linger, do not listen too closely. They know the scream is not content with being heard. It wants to be answered, and those who answer in voice or in thought risk becoming part of it. This would explain why so many who hear it claim to detect whispers, names, personal messages buried in the cry. The scream adapts. It learns, it finds the crack in the listener's defenses and slips through, And what of the tourists? The modern crowds who gather with phones raised, who laugh nervously as the hour approaches. They believe they are safe, buffered by numbers, by technology, by the idea that legends lose their power when turned into spectacle. But the scream has never cared for such illusions. It needs only ears, only eyes, only attention. And now, thanks to the age of social media, it has more listeners than ever before. A voice once confined to a valley now travels across screens played in bedrooms and basements worldwide. Each replay spreads the sound further. Each click gives it strength. The scream has never had so vast an audience. Perhaps this is why in recent years the stories have shifted. Reports emerge of people hearing the cry far from the castle, miles away, even in other countries. Some claim they were watching a video when they suddenly felt the sound inside their own walls, as though the scream had stepped through the recording into their home. Others speak of dreams that begin with silence, then rupture with the midnight cry, jolting them awake at the exact hour, heart pounding, ears ringing. If these accounts are true, then the scream is no longer bound to its fortress. It is spreading, carried by the very people who sought only to witness it. And so we are left with a chilling possibility. The scream is not asking to be solved, it is asking to be shared. It has survived centuries because it does not need believers, it only needs listeners. Every ear that hears it, every eye that watches a recording, every voice that retells the legend ensures its survival. We are not unraveling its mystery, we are propagating it. The scream is immortal because we made it so. What then is the truth? A ghost? A curse? A wound carved into stone? Or something else entirely? Something patient, something that waited for centuries until the world grew loud enough to carry it everywhere? Perhaps all the theories are wrong. Perhaps all are right. Perhaps the scream is not meant to be understood, only endured. As the clock strikes 12, the fortress cries again. A voice of grief, of rage, of torment, of hunger. It tears through stone, through valley, through air, through memory. It is not just the castle that screams, it is history itself. It is betrayal and blood, sin and sacrifice, echoing forever, because silence was never an option. The scream will outlive the ruins, outlive the valley, outlive us all. And when the midnight hour comes, wherever you may be, ask yourself this: if you hear it, far away, faint yet unmistakable, will you believe it is only a story, or will you know the truth? That the scream no longer belongs to the castle alone, that it has found you, that it has been waiting. The castle has stood for centuries, yet its stones do not crumble quietly. It does not fade into ruin as other fortresses do, forgotten by history and consumed by ivy. It resists, not with armies or banners, but with its voice. Each midnight without fail, the cry reminds the world that some places are not buried by time, they are sustained by it. The scream has become more than a legend, more than a mystery. It is an inheritance of dread, passed down from villager to tourist, priest to scientist, skeptic to believer, and perhaps now to you. The question of what the scream is will never be answered. Every attempt by faith, by science, by ritual, has faltered, leaving only theories stacked upon theories like bones in a crypt. Yet the failure to solve it may itself be the answer. The scream exists not to be understood, but to be endured, not to be explained, but to be carried. It is eternal precisely because it resists clarity. Ambiguity is its power. Fear thrives not in answers, but in questions. But what if the scream is not bound to the fortress at all? What if it is bound to memory? For centuries those who heard it repeated the story, whispered it to children, recorded it in journals, etched it onto tape. They became its keepers, ensuring it never died. And now, with each clip shared, each post debated, each video replayed, the scream multiplies. It leaves the valley behind, traveling through wires, through speakers, through imagination. You do not have to stand at the castle gates to hear it. You need only close your eyes at midnight and wonder if the silence outside your window is truly silence at all. The idea is chilling that the scream may have been waiting for this moment in history, waiting for a world connected by unseen threads, where one cry can echo across continents in seconds. Once it haunted a village. Now it haunts the world. Perhaps this is why modern witnesses report hearing it, even when far away. Perhaps the scream has found new ways to travel. Sound is not confined to air. It can exist in memory, in thought, in fear, and fear spreads faster than any voice. If so, then what happens next? Does the scream grow louder with each retelling, stronger with each replay? Will there come a day when the castle no longer needs to cry at all, because its voice will already live inside us, repeating at every midnight across the globe? Will its legacy outlast the ruins themselves, until even when the fortress has crumbled to dust, the scream remains, disembodied, eternal? Some would say this is only superstition, that the cry is bound to one place, one ruin, one valley, but history warns us otherwise. The villagers spoke of it following descendants far from the castle, tourists speak of it lingering in dreams, investigators speak of it whispering their names. Again and again the same warning emerges: once you hear the scream, you are never free of it. You carry it with you, a parasite of sound, a memory that gnaws at the edges of silence. And so perhaps the scream does not belong to the castle anymore. Perhaps it belongs to everyone who has heard it. Each listener becomes a vessel, each retelling another echo. In this way the scream achieves immortality, not through stone but through us. And what could be more terrifying than that? That the true curse is not the fortress, not the chamber, not even the family who once ruled it, but the spreading contagion of a single sound, repeated endlessly across centuries. Imagine this: the clock strikes midnight. You are alone, or perhaps you are not. The world outside your window is quiet, the air still, and then, faint but undeniable, you hear it, the long piercing cry that has traveled through centuries to reach you. You tell yourself it cannot be real, that you are imagining it, but you cannot unhear it. You check the clock. It is midnight, to the second. The scream fades, leaving silence so heavy it seems unnatural. You wait, trembling for something else to follow. Nothing does, not yet, but you know it will return tomorrow, and the next night, and the next, until you begin to wonder whether you are cursed, or whether you have simply joined the endless chain of witnesses who carry the scream forward into eternity. The castle may be the source, or perhaps it was only the beginning. What matters now is not where the scream comes from, but where it goes. It is no longer confined to stone walls and ruined towers. It is here, in the air we breathe, in the stories we tell, in the silence that presses against our ears at night. The scream has escaped history. It has entered us, and as we close this story, as the credits roll and the night stretches long, there is one last thought to leave with you. Tonight, when you lie in bed and the world grows quiet, listen closely, listen to the silence, because if you listen long enough, if you dare to count the seconds as midnight approaches, you may find that silence is not as empty as it seems. You may hear something faint, distant, yet undeniable, a cry, ancient and endless, reaching for you across centuries. And if you do, then you will understand what the villagers, the soldiers, the priests and the investigators all understood before you. The scream was never theirs to contain. It was always meant to spread, and now it has found you.